All right, Mayor, I think people are filtering in, but whenever you're ready to get started, it's 7 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our public forum on deer management in Highland Park. Over the last few years, we've been inundated with resident complaints about the increasing deer population in Highland Park. You may also recall that several months ago, as recommended by the NJDEP, we conducted a drone study of where Highland Park's deer population are congregating. The goal of this evening's meeting is for residents and also the governing body to hear from experts at NJDEP Fish and Wildlife about these findings and the potential health risks posed by urban deer populations and options that are available for mitigation. Just to remind everyone, this is not a council meeting. It's an information session. After learning from this presentation, council will discuss the matter at future Public Safety Committee meeting and eventually at a work session in a council meeting. The public may make comment at either or both of these meetings. We ask that everyone hold their questions until the end of the presentation, at which time the Borough Administrator will open the chat window for questions, as well as call on attendees with their hands raised. With that, I am handing this meeting over to our Borough Administrator, Terry Hovere. Terry?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm going to do a quick share screen. Give me a moment. Just a couple overview slides before we get into our main presentation. So just to give again, kind of reiterating some of the housekeeping items the mayor said, but I did want to mention that the intended stop time is 8:30. So, and we intend to get it to as many questions as we can during that time. This program is informational. We're not making decisions. This is informing decisions this evening. And this is a time to listen and ask questions. And there will be future opportunities for public comment at council meetings and other venues, including email to council members, et cetera. So there seemed to be some confusion about that online, and I just wanted to make that double down on that point. What the agenda for this evening is pretty straightforward. I'm going to give a short one-slider on how we got to this point to build off of what the mayor provided. We have our presentations from our two members from the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and then we're going to those audience questions. We're going to utilize the chat feature first as a way to get through as many questions as we can, because we are lucky to have these two women here to provide us with this information. They won't be at all of our future meetings. So I want to focus on using this time the best we can with them. And if time allows, if we eat up all the questions and there's a little time, we could open up for some comment at 3 minutes each, like we do in some of our other meetings. But let's just see how this goes. The question that always comes up, because I recognize the audience is not able to see each other at this point because of the way the platform works. We have, as of before my screen share anyway, about 50 people in attendance. And I'll if that bumps upward significantly, I'll mention that, but just so that the public is aware. So with that, I'm just going to give you my quick how we got here slide. As the mayor mentioned, there were numerous resident complaints and concerns about deer issues, including eating foliage, near misses with auto accidents, health concerns regarding Lyme's disease, and also just frankly nuisance in terms of standing in walkways, not moving out of the way, feeling trapped in your house. Those, if I had to give a synopsis of the typical complaints, that would be it. I was charged with kind of how do we figure something out for Highland Park? What should we do? Where I was lucky enough to find the folks here that we're on the Zoom with in January. We had a meeting to kind of provide an overview, much of the flavor of which will be presented tonight, but in a little more detail. At the recommendation of Jody from the Division of Fish and Wildlife, we had secured and conducted a drone survey, but unfortunately the data was lost due to problems with the vendor. However, we did not pay a dime for that, so I just want to make sure the public's clear on that. And due to the timing that's necessary to count due to foliage and so forth on the trees, we had to wait until next winter, December, to do an accurate job. And we got the folks at the Raritan Valley Community College who do this work to do the study for us. In partnership, I should mention, with Rutgers via the Ecological Preserve and the county. They also contributed to the cost of the study because it included their properties. So in February, that report was submitted to the borough, and I wanted to also make sure everybody was aware that it is available on our website at hpborough.com. And the easiest way to find it is if you type in Deer Survey in the search bar on the homepage, it's the first link that should pop up for you. So just so you know, I know it was also promoted on Facebook and other places, but you may want to take a closer look following the presentation. And so with that, brief overview, I'd like to transition to tonight's presentation. First up will be Jody Powers, Senior Wildlife Biologist. Jody, maybe wave so everybody can see who you are. And Cindy Kinsner, also with the Division of Fish and Wildlife and Senior Wildlife Biology. They have a tag team presentation, so Jody's gonna go first and then Cindy's gonna come after, and then following that, we'll open it up for questions. So with that, I'm gonna stop my share, and I'm going to now turn it over to Jody to share her slides and her presentation. So thank you, Jody.
Thank you. So let's hope this works. All right. Everybody can see it, I hope?
Yes, you should be fine.
Okay, this is my first Zoom presentation, so let's hope that everything, goes well. Mm-hmm. I want to thank Terry and the mayor for having us tonight. And we just want to start by saying that we understand that hunting is a very personal and emotional topic for some people. But, we want to tell you that we appreciate you coming out and letting us explain some facts and science for you. We also want to let you know that, the Division of Fish and Wildlife is not out to, remove deer from the landscape. We understand that deer play a vital role in every ecosystem, and it's all about balance. And when things become out of balance, that's when you get some of the detrimental. We're going to go into all of that. With that, as we know, we're here to discuss Highland Park. And I'm going to start with some basic deer biology and ecology, and then go through some causes of overabundance, effects of those overabundance of deer populations, and then go through some solutions. And then I'm going to narrow it down to specific recommendations and possible solutions for Highland Park, individually. So, basic deer biology. Adults average 80 to 100 pounds for females, 150 pounds for males, depending on the habitat quality. During the warm months, they have a reddish brown coat. In the cold months, they shed that out and they have a grayish brown coat with a thick undercoat that protects them from the cold weather. Deer can sprint up to 35 miles an hour and can leap over 8-foot tall barriers with no problem. An average age for a buck in New Jersey is 2.5 years old. And they begin antler growth early spring in a velvet stage. And then those antlers harden up in the wintertime into like a bone. And then they shed them each winter. Home ranges of deer average between 1 square mile. And then the males will have a bigger home range because they do spread out further to breed. For deer reproduction, deer are matriarchal species, which means that the young stay with the mom up until a certain age, and then she'll push them out, for breeding. Does breed typically in New Jersey at 1.5 years old, and they will give birth to 1 to 2 fawns. Sorry. The rut or the breeding season peaks in November for New Jersey, And females will cycle every 28 days. So if they're not bred, they will cycle again to be bred again every 28 days. Gestation is about 200 days, and fawns are usually birthed between May and June. Feeding habits, deer can eat or must eat 2 to 7 pounds of vegetation per 100 pound of deer every day. So that's a lot of vegetation every day. They tend to eat fruits and seeds, herbaceous plants, and woody browse. Deer are an edge species. They don't typically like big, heavy wooded areas, but they do need that to run to for cover and for feeding. But they do also like fields for browsing for food. So they really thrive where that forest abuts up to open spaces. So how did we get to where we are now? Some of these images are typical of urban areas all throughout New Jersey. Some, you know, you've probably seen a lot of these same scenes in Highland Park. So basically we started with, we created the deer habitat. Like I said, they prefer that open space where it abuts up to forest areas. So as farmland was sold and converted into developments, corporate parks, that created the perfect habitat that they prefer. This map, I'm hoping it's moving for you guys as well. Basically, as you know, it was developed, like this map shows how it's developed over the past, you know, this is 10 years old by now, but you'll see that this is how it developed. So that's how we got here. We did a great job of preserving open space, but it also created some problems. And I'll get into those, you know, further on. The second reason is lack of hunter access. As you know, this farmland was sold or preserved by municipalities or, you know, private organizations, they tend to stop all hunting. So, you know, it's created a lack of hunter access. They can't get to the deer to be able to control them. Increased nutrition will increase reproductive rates. So as the farmland was converted into suburban areas and people were having gardens and plantings, they were getting a lot more easy accessible food. So it tends to increase the reproductive rates. The elimination of top predators. We no longer have any predators in New Jersey except for cars and, you know, hunters. So there's no predator to keep the population in check. Some other contributing factors, again, you know, we've done a great job preserving open space, but if it's not hunted, there's no way to control that population. So we've created deer refuge areas in the form of parks, other open space, golf courses, corporate parks, large estates. Some towns, you know, have zoning where, you know, to build a house, you have to have 5 acres. Well, now that's 5 acres that can be considered refuge for the deer. And then municipalities sometimes have no discharge ordinances as well. So we've established, you know, the causes of an overabundance of a deer population. There's typically 5 things that occur and their detrimental effects to an overabundance. And most municipalities will contact us on any 5 or any combination of the 5. But it always comes down to public health, public safety through deer vehicle accidents, forest health, you know, degradation of the forest, quality of life for residents. So, you know, you can no longer grow a garden. You can't plant, you know, your ornamental plantings. There's lots of, you know, deer scat around that, you know, that's you know, affecting your quality of life. And also agricultural damage to the farmer. So I'm going to go through all of those things. So the first is public health. This is always on a lot of people's minds. Tick-borne illnesses such as Lyme disease. Deer play an important role in the black-legged tick life cycle. So it's a host for that tick, and it provides a very large food source as a big blood meal. Jersey has one of the highest cases of Lyme disease in the country. Last year it was 13.8% of all cases nationwide were in New Jersey. Lyme disease isn't the only tick-borne illness that we should be concerned about. There's a new invasive tick was found in sheep in New Jersey, and then other insects too. The triple E, equine encephalitis. A couple deer have been diagnosed with that from last year, and that's spread from a mosquito, and that can also be transmitted to humans. The next thing is the public safety aspect, the deer vehicle accidents. This is from State Farm. So last year, there was 32,000 reported deer vehicle accidents in New Jersey. And now these are just the reported ones. So if you don't have collision and you don't want to report it, you don't have to. If you just want to pay the deductible yourself or just pay to get it fixed. So this is the reported number. So 32,000 is a pretty big number of reported, and rule of thumb is you can always almost double that because almost the same amount of number aren't reported. So that's a lot of deer that are being hit on New Jersey roadways. Just a little couple things about deer vehicle accidents. There's always a bump up in deer vehicle accidents in October to November due to the rut that I discussed before. Deer, oh God, I thought I just X'd out of it, my apologies. There's another increase in May to June due to does looking for areas to give birth. So those are two bump ups for deer vehicle accidents. There's a misconception that hunting causes a lot of deer vehicle accidents in that October-November range, and really it's only because deer's most active during twilight, so dawn and dusk. And with the time change, it corresponds with rush hour in the morning and in the evening. So, you're combining a lot of cars on the road at the time where deer are most active, as well as it's increasing their activity because it's in the rut, it's the breeding season. So the third thing that people tend to ask us about as far as deer overabundance is forest health. Deer are a keystone herbivore species, which means that they affect everything from, insects all the way up to, higher species. And without a predator, the herbivore population explodes and wipes out dominant native plants and dramatically alters the ecosystem. You need a certain number of deer in an ecosystem or in a forest because they, a certain level of browse will allow native species to, grow. But when you have an overabundance, they're eating everything that's native and they're allowing the non-native species to flourish. So this is just some examples of some forest health. The picture on the left is a healthy forest. That's actually a bear. The picture on the right is what's not healthy. There's no understory. There's no regeneration of any trees. You shouldn't be able to see, yards and yards into a forest. So these are just two examples of the differences of forest health. Again, these are healthy forests. You have lots of shrub, a pretty good shrub layer here, and you have lots of saplings that are able to grow up and replace those older trees. This, you might think this is a good forest. It's healthy, it's nice and green, but this is an example of those native species or those invasive species that have taken over the forest. So this is kudzu, this is Japanese barberry, Japanese stiltgrass, garlic mustard. These are all invasive species and they're crowding out the natives. This is an example of, some other unhealthy forest in Bergen County. This is actually your property here in Highland Park. Again, no understory, nothing's happening. And these are two other examples in Bergen County. The fourth thing is the quality of life. So, again, too many deer, they're coming into your yards, they're eating your gardens. And these actually, the pictures on the bottom, can you see my mouse moving or no? Yeah, okay. So these two pictures on the bottom, they're taken right across from the meadows in your property or at your property. And you can see this is a browse line. These are damage to all of these trees right next door. So again, it's affecting a quality of life. You can't grow what you want to grow on your own property. The last thing is the agricultural damage, which really doesn't apply to Highland Park, but deer cause a lot of damage. In New Jersey, I think, farmers are losing $15 million in agricultural damage every year. So I'm going to go through some options and strategies. So, I went through why there's an overabundance and the detrimental effects. And now I'm just going to give you some options and some strategies that are perceived. Some of them are perceived strategies and options, and then other ones are reality, what can be done. So one of the strategies, I'm going to go through the non-lethal ones first. One is do nothing. It is an option. Is it the wisest option? No. There's a theory that just let them go and, they'll take care of themselves. Most of the landscape in New Jersey, deer will never reach biological carrying capacity. So they're never going to self-regulate. Without anything in check, this last graph, the population will, increase exponentially. This is an old from science class, the whole predator-prey thing, which they keep each other in check. But again, there's no natural predators for deer in New Jersey. There are some non-lethal behavior modification that you can do, and it's behavior modification for deer as well as for humans. But this one is noise repellents, chemical repellents. This is mostly for agricultural issues with deer. Obviously not going to work in Highland Park. The chemical repellents don't work. You have to keep reapplying after it rains and whatnot. So this is not really an option for Highland Park. A behavior modification for the deer is also fencing, either through electric fencing and these high fences. Again, I mentioned before that they can, jump an 8-foot fence pretty much standing still. This is expensive. It's a lot of maintenance, and it's not very pleasing to the eye if everyone was just gonna, fence in their yard. Sometimes there's ordinances against that anyway. So this isn't really an option either. There's some non-lethal strategies to reduce deer vehicle accidents that have limited success. Signage, those whistles that you attach to your car, reflectors, none of these work long-term, and none of them deal with the number of deer that you already have. The reflectors, the theory is that your headlight shines on them and reflects back into the woods to stop the deer to headlights. They're very expensive. The angle has to be just right. So, during, snow removal, plowing, they constantly have to be, fixed and whatnot, and they just really don't work. These signs, obviously the deer don't necessarily follow the signs. It's mainly letting the drivers know that it's a high deer area, but you become numb to them. You drive by one 10 times and you even forget that it's there. So they don't really work long-term either. Wildlife crossings, there's been some success with wildlife crossings to keep deer off of the roads. This actually is a roadway in New Jersey that has some success. And these are tunnels that are underneath the highways, but again, not an option really for Highland Park. Trap and transfer. So this we get all the time. Why can't we trap them and move them somewhere else? This used to be done, but it's not an option anymore. You can't move deer out of state anymore because of chronic wasting disease. And really there's nowhere in New Jersey to put them. Majority of the areas in New Jersey have too many deer as it is. So there's nowhere to move them. And then sometimes they're going to die anyway because they get something called capture myopathy. Deer are very high stress, and the stress of the whole process of moving them could end up killing them anyway. You would get an increase of deer vehicle accidents as well because when when they wake up, they're in a new area, they have no idea where they are, so they're running around. But this is not really an option anymore either in New Jersey. Fertility controls, there's been a lot of study across the world, decades, a lot of money spent. And there's different kinds of fertility controls. One, for the female and the male both. Immunocontraceptive, you can prevent the egg from fertilizing, you can prevent the deer from actually coming into estrus, prevent the eggs from being released. All of these are logistically complex, very expensive, different types of treatment multiple times throughout the year. There's still continuing to be a lot of research, but none of these are options either in New Jersey. Most fertility control studies have been done on a closed population, not on a free-ranging population. Now they're moving away from the drug part of it, and there's been more studies being done on sterilization, either on the female or the male. For the females, there's two types. You can either do a tubal ligation or you can do an ovarectomy. Again, there's been multiple studies. Cornell University did a big study a number of years ago on tubal ligation. It ended up costing $800 to $1,000 per deer at the start of the study. Excuse me. And then $3,500 per deer for the last 10%. The effectiveness was that does continued to enter estrus cycles and attracted additional bucks trying to breed. And the increase in the bucks that came in to try to breed those deer offset the reduction in the number of fawns that were being born. Dr. Paul Curtis is the veterinarian that conducted that survey in Cornell, and his comment is right there that communities should avoid non-lethal methods as they show little promise in areas where deer can move freely on the landscape. Excuse me. The other one for females is ovarectomies now. White buffalo has been doing some study on these. This cost is higher than other methods because it's basically a surgery. And it prevents deers from actually entering into the estrus cycle. And again, but it's not effective on free-ranging populations. So there's also been a study on sterilization for males where they're just doing vasectomies, not castrations. I don't know if you're familiar. White Buffalo, again, is a company that's doing it. They're doing a study on Staten Island. It was supposed to be, I think the original budget was $2 million, and it was supposed to be a 2-year study. They're now at like 9 million. I think they're entering into their 7th year. And 92% of the males were sterilized. The project has been suspended for 2 separate years because what they're doing is they're baiting the deer in, and then they're tranquilizing them and then performing the surgery. 2 years, the mast crop, the acorn crop was too big, too great, and they weren't coming into the bait to be able for them to trap them. And again, it's not going to be effective because you would have to sterilize every single male in order for it to be effective. One male can breed 30 does, so you have to get all of the males in order for it to work. which is not possible. And there's unknown effects on buck behavior. They've had a huge increase of deer vehicle accidents because they're doing vasectomies and not castration, that the drive to breed is still there, and they're still running around trying to breed does even though they can't. And there's another issue of migration. So we've had a couple deer that have been sterilized from Staten Island show up in New Jersey. So if they're migrating out, then there's definitely deer from New Jersey that are migrating in. So again, it's not going to work. It's not a viable option for a free-ranging population. At any rate, for any fertility study in New Jersey would require a community-based permit that would need to be approved by the Fish and Game Council. Municipalities could apply, submit a research proposal. Saddle River applied for one a number of years ago, and it was ultimately denied because of the low chance of success. So again, not an option for a free-ranging population. This is just another study. Dr. Katz from Rutgers has done decades of research on fertility controls. And I want you just to pay attention to this, the silver line. This would be at 100% effectiveness. So whatever you decided to do, if you were doing male sterilization or female sterilization, 100% of these deer would be treated. It would still take 30 years to have any, real effect. So again, it just does not work on a free-ranging population. So those are the non-lethal strategies. So this goes into the lethal options of population control. There's two, trap and euthanize, and the use of cull or sharpshooters. Both of these require a community-based permit by the Fish and Game Council. Municipalities, counties, or airports can apply to that program. It would be approved for areas where regulated hunting is not an option or to extend a season that already is in existence during the regular season. Currently, there's 4 permits that are approved in New Jersey: Bernards Township, Princeton, Essex County Parks, and Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst. These are logistically complex and they're very expensive. The average rate is $500 to $800 per deer when it's all said and done. The venison is donated. But again, the Fish and Game Council is not approving any new permits if regulated hunting can be used in that municipality. So this isn't an option right now either. So that brings us to regulated hunting. It's a proven effective deer population management tool worldwide. It's been around, people have been hunting for, hundreds of years. It's the only tool that is still used worldwide. It's the least expensive option because you're using hunters to do the work for you. And it's practical and flexible to meet your biological and your social needs. So just a quick overview of some of the regulated hunting, how it works in New Jersey. New Jersey manages deer on a zone basis, not on a county basis. And the reason for that is we have different regulations for different areas. The zones were a way to join land cover and different land use, as well as have a barrier between hunting areas that is recognizable. Most of them are highways or roads or whatever. If it was a county, you could cross from, if you're hiking even, you can cross from one county into another. You don't even know that you crossed over into that county. So we manage on a zone basis for that reason. There are 67 approximately deer management zones in New Jersey. And New Jersey has one of the most liberal bag limits and dates in the nation. So as you go down the list, it becomes more and more liberal. So Reg Set 1 Oh, so the zones are then grouped, like zones are grouped into reg sets to just simplify the regulations. Reg set 0 has, the most conservative bag limits and dates. Reg set 8 has the most liberal. And then if you look at this map again, you'll see these areas in red correlate to the areas that are in Reg Set 8. So you'll see that the most populated areas have the most liberal reg sets and bag limits to try to, control those populations in the areas that really need it. This is our harvest over time. The green is the total. The blue is the antlerless, which includes does, fawns, and shed bucks. And then the red is the antlered over time. Last year we harvested 45,650 deer. This is our license sales. It is decreasing mainly because, people are running out of time. They have other sports, other activities, but it is leveling off. The past couple of years, it has leveled off. And even though the license sales is decreasing, the harvest isn't. It's staying the same. It's about 45 to 50,000 a year. So even though the license sales is decreasing, our increased bag limits and our increased season is keeping the harvest right where it is, pretty consistent. So what does this mean for Highland Park specifically? So I went through the general, what the options are, and now I'm going to bring it back specifically to Highland Park. One of the first things that Highland Park can do is adopt an ordinance banning the feeding of deer for a number of reasons. Feeding increases reproductive potential. Again, increased nutrition would increase reproductive potential. Deer lose fear of humans from feeding, and that sometimes causes a aggressive deer. We've had a number of dogs attacked. And a couple years ago, there was actually a woman that was attacked by a deer that had been fed by humans. It causes, it's lightning here. I hope I don't lose my power. It enhances the spread of disease and parasites. Anytime you have a large group of animals that are congregated in a certain area, the chance of disease and parasites. And it also brings in other animals, such as raccoons. Rabies is an issue as well. It can change behavioral habitats. It could cause deer to cross roadways that they wouldn't normally cross if they know that there's someone there that's feeding. They basically don't need our help. They've adapted. They're a highly adaptable animal, and they've adapted over time to be able to survive the rough winters. And let's face it, the winters in New Jersey aren't that bad. But like I said, they put on their winter coats. They pack on weight, fat around their organs, and they don't need our help. Feeding can cause illness and death. Just like us, we have different probiotics in our systems, and deer's probiotics and they're in their guts, it changes throughout the calendar year to be able to process whatever food they're eating seasonally. And if you start feeding them things that are not what their bodies need at that certain time, it can cause illness and even death. And basically, you don't want to be a bad neighbor. You don't want to feed, and your neighbor next door has beautiful tomatoes and a beautiful garden, because if you're feeding, then it may cause them to go over there and eat their your neighbor's garden. So again, Terry mentioned about the drone survey. So I'm just going to go over some of the things that Dr. Jay Kelly and his group had found. So they did a drone survey over 3 evenings in December. These were the routes that they ran. And it included, it did include a buffer, and they did all of Highland Park. So it included Highland Park proper, and then also the Rutgers Eco Preserve and Johnson Park along the river. So a total of 374 deer were counted during this survey over a 4 square mile survey area. So if you take the number of deer that were seen divided by the square miles, it came out with a density of 93 deer per square mile. So this entire area was 93 deer per square mile. They also then broke it out because if you're a resident of Highland Park, you know that even though it's Highland Park property, there's different owners. So Rutgers Ecological Reserve has a part, and Johnson Park with Middlesex County Parks has a part as well. So they did break those areas out. And you'll see here. So it's different densities for the area that they actually did. So Highland Park, and I have maps in the next slide, but Highland Park, that density itself was 74. Donaldson Park was 148 deer per square mile. The Eco Preserve was 114 deer per square mile, and Johnson Park was 121 deer per square mile. And again, there's a link for this study on your website, I believe, or will be.
There is.
Okay. So these are the other areas, Rutgers here, and you can see the number of deer that we're seeing there. And then this is Johnson Park along the river. And I'm gonna refer to these maps in the next slide. So again, what does this mean for Highland Park? So the division is recommending that this area down here, which is the meadows, to open that up for a controlled hunt. Controlled meaning that you would limit the number of hunters that are in there, and it's probably could only be 2 or 3 hunters. It would be archery season only. They would be in a tree stand. They would harvest or target antlerless deer, because that's the way you control the population. You take the breeders out, and it would be over baited spots. So that would be the recommendation for, is it, what you don't call it downtown Highland Park, is it? Or like, this area of Highland Park?
South side.
South side. And then we're also recommending having a cooperative effort with those other 2 entities. And we did have a meeting with them in the beginning of this, which was in April, I think. And we discussed options. So Rutgers, they already have a program, a hunting program on their property. And we recommended that they expand their current program and then also possibly add more property to their program that they have now. So this would alleviate, some of the problems filtering into Highland Park on the north side. And then Middlesex County Park System, they do have hunt programs on a number of their other park properties. They do not hunt Johnson Park. So we have asked them, to consider opening up Johnson Park to their list of hunted properties. And that would be a regulated hunt as well. Only a certain number of hunters would be allowed in there, and most likely would be archery only. They agreed also to participate in a plan for Donaldson Park in the south side too, if that would ever be needed. It wouldn't be hunted itself, but there could be some sort of a cooperative movement to push some of those deer out of Donaldson Park as well. I think, that's all I have, but we're going to save comments till after.
Correct. So now thank you, Jody. Really appreciate it. Just to give the audience an update, this may break our Zoom record, Mayor. We've got 120 attendees at the moment. So welcome those of you who joined since we began. We'd like to turn now to Cindy Kinsner, who's going to share her screen, if we can figure that out, and just kind of give us a little more information on hunting. And I won't even begin to explain it because she's going to do that. So some of the things, because I know I personally wasn't very familiar with this, being a very suburban, urban person, and so I think this would be very useful for everybody to hear.
Thank you, Terry.
Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Mayor. And I'm glad to hear that there are 120 participants observing this presentation this evening. Jody laid out the options that are really non-options, which led us to the same thing that many municipalities in New Jersey find with deer overabundance. The residents wind up approaching their municipal leaders to seek relief. It's not just a New Jersey problem. The problem has been going for years, especially in the more densely populated states. But as you can see, Time magazine cover, it's widespread, but it does cause greater problems in those suburban areas where our habitat supports large populations of deer. The interesting thing is if you poll, whether nationwide or in New Jersey municipalities, if you survey residents, as many as 74% of those surveyed respondents support regulated hunting as a wildlife management technique. And that's a number that your municipal officials would find very useful, that there's that sort of support. The primary goal, of course, is for human health, to improve and protect human health and safety and property, while also encouraging the natural regeneration of native vegetation, such as at the meadows in Highland Park. People want to know how safe is hunting. So to put it in perspective for New Jersey in particular, if you took the number of hunters, and Jody shared a slide earlier, yes, the number are declining, but if you took the number of hunters and the number of days, recreation days that they could spend afield, it would be millions of recreation days afield in New Jersey. So for people who want to know how safe is hunting, only a few years ago, but for the data that I have that's current, there were 5 hunting accidents statewide, only among hunters, minor situations. And so to contrast that, although you can't see the numbers, they're too small, taking a look at Middlesex County, the number of auto accidents with injuries in Middlesex County was nearly 6,000. So putting that into perspective, hunting is a safe sport. One of the key reasons for this is that almost every state in the country requires mandatory hunter education. New Jersey's program is award-winning. We have a home study program that combines work at home in a workbook, field course exercises, a written exam, and 100% of the participants must be involved in live firing shooting to demonstrate a safe handling of the sporting arm. There are many regulations. In fact, this image of our hunting and trapping digest, it's nearly 90 pages long. Not all of it is regulations, but a large majority of it is. And hunters are responsible to know the regulations and laws. And hunting is a highly regulated activity. As Jody mentioned, a controlled hunt would be have additional, in any municipality that does this, have additional hunt program rules that are tailored to the municipality and the actual property that is being hunted. This is at the corner of South Fifth Avenue and Valentine in Highland Park. So in more densely populated areas, regulated bow hunting is a good match. The key reasons: it's quiet, discreet, effective, and short range. In many places in New Jersey where open space is also allows regulated hunting, there's mutual overlapping of users in places such as county parks, municipal open space areas, where hunters and other resource users respect the activities of the others. This happens in many county parks where there have been no incidents. In fact, in my entire almost 40-year career, there have been no incidents in any controlled hunt in New Jersey. These are just a few of the municipalities that we've worked with over recent years that utilize regulated hunting on municipal lands. Just a reminder, hunting is a safe sport. It's a key takeaway message that we want you to be aware of and keep in mind. if there's consideration for hunting in Highland Park. Regulated hunting as a management tool is efficient, effective, and free. So again, the primary goal of regulated hunting as a deer management technique is for humans. It's to improve and protect human health, safety, and while encouraging the natural regeneration and diversity of native vegetation. That's my summary, and we'll be glad to take questions.
All right, so just remember to unshare your screen, and before we launch in, give me a moment. Emma, I'm going to ask you to open chat to our attendees. We're going to start with questions via chat because I think there's going to be some repeat questions here and there, and so to the extent that we can cover more territory, because we have apparently 112 people, if people are curious, on the call. I would like to.
Henry, before you call.
Yes.
So Cindy or Jody, could you explain what happens to the deer that are killed? Do the hunters do anything with the dead animals?
Do you want me to?
Sure.
Yeah, so there's, for a municipal program, you could either let the hunter take the deer themselves for consumption. The hunters remove the deer, obviously, from the property once it's harvested. There are some municipalities that require those deer to be donated. And there's a number of programs in New Jersey. It's called Hunters Helping the Hungry, where the hunters would donate that deer to be processed and then distributed at food banks.
Thank you.
While some of the questions come in, I just want to remind people we're trying to target questions of these two speakers from the Division of Fish and Wildlife first, because we have them here to clarify anything that they've already presented or to answer any questions that they didn't cover. So I'm going to prioritize reading those out. And while those come in, I identified a couple of my own. I'm going to take, similar to the mayor, I'm going to use my opportunity to ask. Regarding the do nothing approach, you said something about this kind of lack of self-regulation in terms of the population of the deer. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because I guess I thought eventually they'll run out of thing and then they'll level off, won't they? And I guess I want you to expand on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So, so self-regulation would mean if they've reached biological carrying capacity, and biological carrying capacity is what the land, the ecosystem, how many deer that could support. So it would, the level of water, food, shelter, habitat, that whole thing. Unfortunately, because deer are so adaptable, you're never going to reach that over time. As long as all of those four things are met, they can survive anywhere. Jug handles on highways that they're living, producing. So self-regulation would mean that then it becomes overcrowded and then they die from disease or starvation. And that doesn't typically happen in New Jersey. Because there's natural things that would keep it in check, such as, predators, which, like I said, we no longer have. So right now in Highland Park, the only would be the deer vehicle accidents.
Okay. Thank you. And then my other question, and then I promise I'll read off from the audience. Just a question, if hunting is an approach that's increased either in the areas where it's already existing or in new areas, does reducing the number of deer overall, in addition to improving human health, which I heard Cindy say, has some consequences, does it improve the deer health? Because I know that question will come up. So I'm just curious if they're, or is it they're healthy because they're eating all our yards? I'm just curious if that's
it could, yes. So, it could improve their health. Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. I would, but anyway.
especially if native vegetation is
Yes.
allowed to regenerate. It may
Regenerate, right.
require removal of invasive species. I'm not a plant expert, so can't really go into that in depth. But if native species are allowed to flourish because of a lower deer population, then those remaining deer will have healthier native plants that they evolved with.
Okay. So with that, there are a couple of comments. I'm going to skip over those comments and focus on the questions for these two speakers, and then we'll come back to some of the other points. So one question is, if we only allow or can only have 2 to 3 hunters, I'm assuming they mean on the Meadows property, how long will it take to get the deer down to a reasonable level? Let me read it more. Hold the deer population to a reasonable level, and I would add, and how long do you have to do that?
Right. So, I mean, it would depend. Obviously, we would try to maybe set some harvest goals, but at this point, as many as can be removed physically by the hunters that would be the goal. We wouldn't set we wouldn't recommend setting a cap on the number of deer that are harvested in a year. It's not a one and done. It's a maintenance thing. So you would want to, try to remove as many as you can for the first couple of years. And then it would be a maintenance. It's just like cutting the grass or having your, roads plowed or your garbage picked up. It's a maintenance thing. So it's not a one and done. It would take some time to have an effect. And like the reason why we're talking about a cooperative approach is because where it's located, it's really going to only probably have an effect in the south part and from the Donaldson Park part, which is why we want to try to have Rutgers and Johnson Park on the other two sides also increase, which would alleviate some of that damage and some, the social aspect of it, the quality of life for those residents in those areas.
Okay. I'm going to try to unpack a fat one here. Is it true that state wildlife management areas are managed in order to increase the deer population for hunters?
I mean, I can answer that. That doesn't really apply to Highland Park.
Okay, that was a question. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, a state wildlife management area is property that is owned and managed by Fish and Wildlife. So it's not parks such as Parks and Forestry.
Okay.
It's managed, and it's managed for sport recreation, for hunters, for fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
We're not managing it to increase deer. We do a lot of projects and habitat management for other species, non-game bird species. We do lease some of our properties out to farmers because a lot of our properties used to be agriculture owned by farming families.
Mm-hmm.
They sell it to us. We allow them the right still, or we lease it out to farmers to be able to their crops. We require them to leave a certain amount of crop standing. It's not necessarily for deer. It's to provide cover for a number of species, upland game birds, turtles, birds, it runs the whole gamut. So was the question, is it true? Are we doing that?
I interpreted it that way. There was a lot in there. I just wanted to,
I don't know, Cindy, if you have anything to add.
I concur with what Jody said. The goal is not to enhance deer habitat. When habitat is enhanced, it's almost always for, if it's hunting connected, maybe upland bird hunting, or unrelated to hunting and for other non-game and possibly endangered species on the lands that we already own. That's some of the reasons why we own some key properties, is for endangered and non-game species preservation and habitat management.
Okay. I'm going to move on. I saw a comment that somebody had trouble initially getting into the meeting. They're in now, and I didn't mention up front, and I apologize if the mayor didn't, I missed it. The meeting is being recorded and we're going to provide it on HPTV. So for sure, if anybody had any difficulty accessing the meeting or wants to watch it again, that will be available. So I apologize for not making that clear from the top. Let's see. I'm to try to find, I've got somebody who's asking a lot of questions. I'm kind of share it around. How many years of controlled hunts in Highland Park Meadows would have to occur to have a significant impact on the deer problem here? I am well, that's the comment. I'll just leave it at the question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that goes back to the other answer. It depends on the success rate. It depends on the participation. There's really no way to put a limit. You're not going to say, okay, we'll roll out for 10 years and that's it. It's a fluid situation. I don't know, Cindy, if you have anything else that you wanted to add.
The deer are going to be moving. If you remove deer from the population there, deer from slightly, outside of the meadows will find that favorable because there's less competition. So because, like Jody said, both the habitat, the hunting aspects, and the deer population, the individual deer, it's all fluid. And that's another reason why she said it's an ongoing process as a maintenance. There may also be, Highland Park may also, if they go this route, choose to do some habitat management for properties such as the meadows. I think your residents will find a difference in their ornamental plantings over time. Maybe not in the beginning, but over time.
Okay. Could you explain more about how the increase in non-native plant species enabled by deer browse is detrimental to native species and forest health? Is a question.
Okay, so deer have a certain vegetation that they prefer, and majority of that is native species because that's how they evolved to eat what is naturally occurring across the landscape. When you have an overabundance of deer, they're eating basically out of house and home. So they're eating everything that they prefer, which is all the native species, which is every little sapling that comes up, every little flower that's found in the forest. Once they eat all of that, their non-preferred type of vegetation, which is the invasives, which is what people planted or brought in or stuff that's not normally found across the landscape, that's allowed to then grow. And because the deer don't eat that, that's what then takes over the entire ecosystem in a forest. I don't know, Cindy, again, if you want to add anything, go ahead.
I think you did that beautifully.
Okay.
Thanks. Are there deer parasites that would prevent the consumption of deer, if you're aware of that? I don't know if that's in your area of expertise.
Yeah, I'm not a wildlife pathologist.
Yeah.
But deer get diseases just like humans do. So on the average, deer are very safe to eat. Obviously, cooking it is required, certain temperature, just like beef. But there are some, diseases that they get or parasites that they get, and you would know pretty much right away as soon as you were to butcher that deer. When in doubt, call us. My mom always says, when in doubt, throw it out. So, you would call us and we would come out and look at it, get it tested. And but on the whole, most deer are perfectly fine to consume. Cindy, again.
And hunters would be familiar with this.
Yeah.
And we communicate with hunters by various methods, both at Hunting and Trapping Digest with regulations, through our website, emails, through Facebook. And so if there's an issue of concern regarding deer health, we communicate with the hunters, they would be aware.
Yeah, and we have wildlife pathologists on staff. And we also work with the wildlife lab in Ewing. So yeah, we could come out and handle things pretty quickly if need be.
All right, thanks. I see a question here. I'll give you a little context to it. I see 2 to 3 new fawns a year from the deer across the street. Naturally, they would be kept in balance by the predators, like you mentioned. Since there's no hunting in Highland Park, what happens to those 2 to 3 does every year? Obviously, they aren't here or they would have kicked me out of my house by now. What happens to them? Obviously, there's a little joke in there, but can you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't know what the fawn survival rate in Highland Park is. I would suspect it's pretty high. You don't have an overly, large amount of deer that are being hit by cars, but fawns die of, diseases just like the adults do. And they're also moving out. Like we said, the deer that are in Highland Park are not always in Highland Park. So those deer that you're seeing could be moving into Donaldson Park, which then, connects up to Johnson Park, which then connects up to Rutgers, which then goes out to Piscataway or Edison. They could be crossing the river into Franklin Township, New Brunswick. It's a fluid population, which also makes, back to my point about the sterilization or the immunocontraceptive, it's very difficult to spot that same deer over and over again to be able to inoculate it for immunocontraceptive reasons. So, it's easy to spot a fawn when they're young because they have spots, but then they grow up and they look just like every other deer. So I don't think there's a way to be able to tell if that's the same deer or not.
Right.
Right. Cindy?
I agree.
Here's a question about hunting. It's about, I guess, the lethality between bow and arrow hunting versus shooting. Is do the deer die more quickly? And I'm guessing they mean kind of more of a clean death. Is there any kind of statistic between shooting and bow and arrow? And just to clarify, based on your presentation, Cindy and Jody, the recommendation is not firearms. It's bow and arrow for the Highland Park recommendation. But that's a question that somebody had, so I don't know if you could share something.
Do you want to answer this?
Sure. In general, firearm hunting can be more effective because it's a far further range and because of the way the projectiles kill by shock and tissue damage. Set that aside though, because that's not being considered in many municipal areas where regulated hunting has been allowed. It's only bow hunting. A bow and arrow, the arrow is razor sharp and kills by creating hemorrhage, breaking a blood vessel and creating a quick, clean kill. So that's the difference. And we recommend regulated bow hunting because of those reasons mentioned before. It's effective, discreet, quiet, and short range.
Okay. How do you keep non-hunters out of the hunt area in places like parks where there are ways for pedestrians to access the area?
How do you keep non-hunters?
Basically, I'm imagining if there's trails for walking, hiking, etc., how do you keep those people safe while the hunting activity is going on?
Well, as Cindy can speak about the safety part of it.
We might want to look at it the other way around. It's not how does the visitor, the walker, keep themselves safe. The burden is always on the hunter, always. They must be sure of their target and beyond. If a regulated hunt, a controlled hunt, were allowed in Highland Park, just like any other municipality, there would be additional regulations and a hunter orientation or briefing of sorts where the situation, the trails, the habitat would be reviewed with the hunters who might be issued a permit to hunt that area. So it's the hunter responsibility. Many county parks and municipal lands allow multi-use simultaneously. Sometimes if there is a situation such as Plainsboro Preserve, where the New Jersey Audubon Society manages a Plainsboro Preserve, too many deer there, they opened it up to a controlled hunt. And in that area, because the Plainsboro Preserve had multi-use and scheduled activities, if there was bow hunting, they allowed the scheduled activities to continue simultaneously. When Plainsboro Preserve, much more land, 1,000 acres, when they chose to allow firearm hunting, they closed down the trails and other areas to multi-use just for the increased perception of safety, even though it's always the hunter's responsibility to be sure of their target and beyond. And remember that safety statistic, 5 hunting accidents, all of the statewide, with millions of recreation days afield.
And I'll just to clarify, that would be something the borough would have to explore as well. And if we decide to move forward on that, what kind of regulations we'd want to impose on that. I'm sorry, I just lost my place on the questions. Thank you for an informative presentation. And can you please give us an example of a success of targeted hunting in other municipalities? You touched upon that in some of your comments, but if you have a thought you want to share.
Success.
Comparable, I would say a comparable kind of, hunting situation.
Highland Park is so unique. There's such a small property. And so the other areas, every other municipality that I've been closely associated with has sometimes 200 acres or 40 acres or, multiple properties that were managed by a controlled hunt. So it really isn't easy to compare with Highland Park. I can share that Hopatcong had a 200-acre piece of property that when they allow regulated hunting, the habitat did improve, much more restoration of diversity of forest species.
Okay.
Also, deer vehicle collisions are something that are often tracked. Highland Park already has a low number. It may not be indicative of success if the council chooses to move forward with this direction, but Piscataway or other surrounding areas that have larger amount of highway like River Road, Route 18 going through Piscataway would be an example where their deer vehicle collisions would definitely go down. And your residents might notice a decrease in damage to ornamental landscaping.
Okay. And this question actually crossed my mind, and I'm glad the person asked it. Is there an appropriate or healthy number of deer for a town like us? And I think that the drone survey that was done does speak to that a little bit, but if Jody, you give some, you cited the number of deer, but how do we put that into some context of what a healthier population?
Yeah, it depends on each municipality, and it really comes down to almost more of a cultural carrying capacity, which is the number of deer that your residents are willing to tolerate. So there's really not a number. The number that you have now is too high. So anything lower than that would be better than where you are now. As far as forest health, there's a number of 20 deer per square mile is what is needed for maintaining a healthy forest. So if you have a healthy forest, you can have 20 deer per square mile and you will maintain a healthy forest. In a situation like Highland Park, I think it's difficult to put a density on it or a density goal on it because, like I said, it's just basically what your residents are willing to tolerate. You're not going to have the agricultural, aspect of it, or even, slightly forest health because of the meadows. But other than that, I think the driving force of most of this was complaints from your residents. So
Right.
I have too many now. So anything less than what you have now would head in the right direction.
So that, there's for a kind of a suburban area like this, it's not
Yes.
like,
Right.
you want to see this many deer per acre,
Yeah.
for a Highland Park type place. I got
Right.
you. There's a question that says, do you know what areas of Highland Park could accommodate hunters? And I think I just want to clarify myself that the recommendation was the municipal property that we refer to as the meadows adjacent to Donaldson Park is what the recommendation is. I do not believe you're suggesting, but please clarify, hunting on private lands in Highland Park, or is that even allowed? That's a follow-up question that the person asked.
Yeah, it could be, that's not what that's not what we're recommending.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be allowed? I think in the northern part, you have larger landowners, like the larger property. You have a house with more property than you do in the southern part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Cindy said, the example of Hopatcong, you had and even in Shrewsbury by me, you had a group of landowners that joined, worked together, and they had a large enough piece of property that could put a hunter on it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it legal? Yes, you could do it, but that's not what we're recommending. We're only recommending the Meadows property.
Thanks. Someone's asking, are we only going to chat? And I just want to respond to that question. That's the intention, because we are we have as I indicated, quite a number of people, and we're trying to get through questions first, of which I still see we have many. So we're not going to get to comment. We'll reevaluate where we are at 8:30 and see what we want to do. So you already covered that one. If a deer is in my yard, what can I do to get it to leave? Is making loud noises effective, or spraying water? This is a comment or a concern I've heard over the years. Like they're all in my yard and I don't even feel I can walk out. You know, are there some tips?
Yeah, I mean, you could make noises. The thing is that they're like the one slide that I showed about the noise repellents, and that was mainly for agricultural. You could make noises, but what happens is they get used to it. So, I mean, they're used to hearing the cars drive by. They're used to hearing you bring your garbage can out. They're used to hearing, you know, your kids outside. They're so accustomed to a suburban urban setting that really nothing would work. You could try an air horn and it might work once, but you know, you think you're going to make your neighbors angry as well. I think really the only thing is to reduce the number of deer that are in town, and maybe deal with, if you do have a neighbor that's feeding them, that goes back to the no feeding ordinance, to try to prevent that from having them, you know, come into your yard as well.
Thank you. You know, I hadn't thought about the fact that they just get used to it. I was thinking, can you bang some pots and pans together? Sorry, again, I lost my, again, a thank you to you both for your thoughtful presentation. The question is, though, other than the controlled hunt, which seems to be the most logical solution, which of the non-lethal methods have proven to be the most effective, and wouldn't, I'm summarizing, but would a combination approach be worth pursuing?
Again, there's really no non-lethal methods that work. You know, the behavior modification for the deer and the behavior modification for the humans would have temporary effects. But again, they don't work long-term, and none of them deal with the number of deer that you have already. The other non-lethal options, if they're speaking about the sterilization or contraceptive, they're not options. If they were, people would be using them, states would be using them more often, and there's no state and no community that is using immunocontraceptive or sterilization to reduce the population. It just doesn't work on free-ranging populations. I'm not saying that it's never going to be an option. Like I said, you know, there's all kinds of research that's ongoing, and it's been going on for decades. Eventually, if there's something that works, it could be a multifaceted sort of approach where you would use a controlled hunt to reduce the population quickly, and then you could maybe maintain that with some sort of non-lethal contraceptive. But right now, today, it's just not an option.
One question that came into play here was the question about things like reflectors, which my understanding, those are more the motor vehicle accident related to that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you just speak to our motor vehicle accident, or I have the numbers in front of me. We don't have a particularly high percentage of motor vehicle accidents.
No, and that's mainly to defer them off of the roadway. So it's a reflector that has to be placed at a certain height, at a certain angle. And the theory is when you drive by, your headlights hit it and it flashes back to prevent the deer from crossing the road.
Thank you.
Yeah, they don't work.
This is a version of one, but it's a little more specific. But again, how often would we have to have regulated hunting at the meadows? Would it have to be annual? Just say it again.
Yes, it would be. Yeah, it would be annual. This is not, again, it's not a one and done, a 1 year and done. And the reason for that is because deer move over the landscape. So as you remove deer, because you're so overrun right now, you have an overabundance of deer. As soon as you remove some, the ones that are in Donaldson Park are then going to move in. So for a while, you're definitely going to have a filter effect until it starts to level out. So it's one and done. And again, you can't put a number on it and the number of years. I mean, I will say Princeton, you know, had multiple programs, and then they stopped all of them at one point, and their deer car collisions went up 200% by the next year. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's Indiana.
The next question, I guess I want to reframe it a little bit. It states that it was mentioned that trapping is an option, and couldn't we? And there's a term I'm not, but could bring in a chauchet, and excuse my pronunciation, which is apparently something that observant Jews have. I'm sorry, I apologize. And selling the venison to defray costs, but I want you to clarify the former, which is trapping an option.
So I guess they're referring to trap and euthanize, because if they want to donate the venison, is that what they're saying?
I don't know what that statement is, so we'll have to come back to that, I think. I don't know what that means. It's just not a phrase I'm familiar with. And again, they're talking about a question about regulating the hunting. Would it function in parks and on city streets? Would it be regulated? Again, I'm going to say it. We're talking about the option that's on the table that we haven't agreed to, is the Meadows area, borough-owned property, would not be in the streets. It would be restricted to that area. That was just a question. Why is Donaldson Park not a priority?
Donaldson Park, it basically, it doesn't have any habitat to place a hunter. And I'm probably not wording that correctly, because it would be the options are archery only from a tree stand, and that is basically park property. So it's not a viable option for deer removal through hunting. Cindy, you probably elaborate.
That's fine. So the habitat in Donaldson Park, adjacent to the meadow, is mostly open fields. There's also a meadow-like Phragmites and other grasses there that deer don't eat. So if the deer are bedded in the meadows during the day, then they come out, their peak activity, dawn and dusk, you see them during the day too. But if they come out during their peak activity, they're moving into Donaldson Park and the neighborhood, eating grass and browsing on other plants, trees, and other vegetation that that your residents have planted. So because hunting would be done from a tree stand, if the council moved forward, or in other areas where this already takes place, it's hunting from a tree stand, elevated, shooting down to the ground, and there's no trees in Donaldson Park in the areas where that would be necessary.
Okay. I think we covered that one. I'm sorry, reading it. It was a question regarding what the right deer per square mile is, and that we really, there is no number, but we could potentially set goals in the future, was my takeaway. How do you protect the public during hunting in an area such as densely populated as Highland Park?
So that goes back to the statement that it would only be, if the council moved forward, it would only be in the meadows, and it's the hunter's responsibility. If it were determined with a more thorough habitat evaluation that certain days should be closed, there would be signage, notice to the public, and that could happen. But in most areas, municipal lands or county, in many of those areas, hunting and other multi-use trail walkers, dog walkers, bird watchers coexist safely. Again, the burden is on the hunter. Some areas like Plains World Preserve does suggest on overlapping days that if trail walkers chose to wear bright colored clothing, that might be helpful. But hunters are already directed to keep a distance away from trails, they would not be able to face toward a trail, and they would be aware of the activities that are taking place, multi-use activities.
The question was, and I'm sorry if this is kind of a repeat, but I think it might help to clarify, why wouldn't Highland Park be granted a trap euthanized license, which I think is being referred to your presentation, Jody, where that the state has been looking at those requests.
Right. Like that would be a community-based deer management permit. And they are approved by our Fish and Game Council. But they're not approving any new ones if regulated hunting can be an option first. So they would want the meadows hunted. They would want to see what would happen if Johnson Park opens that property, if Middlesex County Parks opens Johnson Park, and if the Rutgers Ecological Reserve expands on their season first. Trap and euthanize does not sound as easy as it sounds. It's not as easy as it sounds. You need a large area to be able to bait the deer to come in. They use a drop net. It was in one of the pictures in the presentation. So you basically bait them in, you drop the net, and it's a captive bolt and gun methodology.
Okay.
It's not professionals roaming the streets with tranquilizer guns, shooting the deer, and then, tranquilizing them and then putting them down. So it's logistically difficult. It's very expensive. And again, it would have to be approved by the Fish and Game Council, and they're not going to do that until, you've tried regulated hunting.
Okay, thank you. Let me go ahead. Someone's asked about how many accidents, I'm assuming they mean motor vehicle accidents, are in Highland Park specifically. I have the numbers in front of me, Jody, but I don't know if you have them, if you want to speak to them.
Yeah, I think over the past 10 years, I think the most that you had was 5 a year. You had 4 last year, and so far in 2020, you have 2.
Right. So put that into context. Sorry, excuse me. I'm trying. There's a lot of commentary. I'm trying to find the questions first. Someone's asked us to please define where the Meadows is in Highland Park, which is a very good question. Jody, do you have the ability to go back to that map and share your screen?
I do. I have to share my screen first. Is that okay?
Well, no, you can find it first and then.
Oh, I can?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no.
Oops. Well, you can back up to whatever's easier.
Does this work? It's right here.
Yeah. So, and just be careful not to go too far north there. It stopped right around there. Yeah. That is a 14-acre. It's adjacent to Donaldson Park. Which is private property. At the base of Valentine Street, essentially, and going behind Donaldson Street.
Right. So this is Donaldson Park, and this is the Meadows right here.
Yeah. The entrance to the walking trails you'd find at the base of Valentine, adjacent to where the Public Works yard is. So, okay, thank you, Jody. Yeah. I should have had that handy myself. I appreciate it. Okay. One thing before, I think we're almost at the 8:30 mark, Mayor.
You're at 8:29.
Yeah. How do you want to move forward?
I don't know if you have any questions.
We have quite a few questions, and I even see a few hands, which if we don't know if we'll get to them. I'm starting to see some themes. I was going to mention there seems to be a lot of questions about those fertility studies, and I'm wondering if you could provide me, I think the easier way to maybe handle that rather than get into a debate on the science, if there's some links with the studies that we can make available to everybody to review as kind of a background first before we get into that. I think that would be very helpful. Is that something
absolutely
you could do? And I will make sure that gets out to everybody who wants to read it for themselves. As we said, we're going to be talking about this for a while. Mayor, we do have a few new questions. Do you want me to continue along this path, or how would you like to proceed?
Well, I don't think we're going to have time for comments, but why don't we go till 8:45? 15 more minutes of questions that you've gotten there.
Right. Yeah. Let's give that a try. I'll try. I think myself, Jody, and Cindy, you're actually very brief, so I won't loop you in. We'll try to keep it short and sweet and try to get through some more questions. So, okay. I'm sorry, there's a lot of commentary. Would locals or could locals get preference to be selected as hunters on these managed hunts?
That's up to your.
So that's a discretion of the municipality?
It's the municipalities. We can work with you and share how other municipalities have handled it, and you get to choose. The Highland Park Council and Administration gets to choose.
Okay, thank you. Is there any experience with hiring professionals to cull the population by a significant number over a relatively short period of time? I'm assuming that gets back at those euthanized, trap euthanize options.
Yeah, that falls under community-based permits. Princeton right now is using a company, White Buffalo, to sharpshoot and reduce their deer. But they've been doing it for a number of years. It's very expensive. It's like like $800 to $1,000 a deer. So in New Jersey, that's the only community-based permit that's using sharpshooters.
Okay. Is it possible to control deer in areas that abut Edison, especially in areas on the north side that is crisscrossed with the many streams and train tracks? I mean, I imagine a lot of that might be privately held, but I'll let you speak to that. Yeah,
we and Cindy, you're pretty good with dates. We met with Piscataway. I mean, they were involved in some of these conversations, but in 2014, did we meet with? I'm
not sure. It was 2014, and then they reached out to you again last fall.
Last year.
2019, yeah. Right.
So we have been in contact with them, not to the level that we've been in contact with Highland Park. But we also met with Edison a number of years ago as well. They contacted us. We had a preliminary meeting with some of our law enforcement, but that didn't move forward either. So, so we have been in contact with them. They've decided to not move forward. That is something that could be considered in this cooperative approach.
Okay. A question that sounds like it's more for myself or the mayor, but how many residents complained about a deer problem? We did track when we first initiated with the Division of Fish and Wildlife. We did make an effort to count and, including reports to police, including, and so we have that from that snapshot in time, which we could dig out and share. But I can represent that we get pretty continual complaints, but I don't have a specific number that I can share, unless, that's that. How soon could a controlled hunt begin based on where we are now?
Yeah.
Could be this fall, but that's up to the council. There are logistics that we can assist with, but the timing, if you start late in the season, that's fine. You just are in better shape for next year. So that may be a consideration. Let your council and your community drive the timing if that's necessary, and we'll adjust and work with you any way we need to.
Can you remind everybody what the hunting season is in New Jersey?
There's many different, but for
Highland Park, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's in Deer Management Zone 36, most of it is, which is in our regulation set 8.
Okay.
So the archery seasons run from 3 different archery seasons run from second Saturday in September through the 3rd Saturday in February.
Okay.
So there's 3 different components. It's fall bow, permit bow, and then winter bow. But again, it wouldn't have to be all of that. It would be, we could, pare it down to exactly what, the needs of Highland Park are.
All right. Sorry. Some things are getting a little silly on the chat. I apologize. I'm trying to go through.
Can Emma help you in any way?
It's hard because otherwise it's going to get unruly. I'm trying to go in order so I don't lose track of questions, Mayor. I'm scrolling through the questions. It's kind of difficult. Apologize.
So you're asking the questions in the order in which?
Yes, I should have said that, with the exception of ones I've skipped over that were commentary, or where I
This is questions. Yeah.
So I apologize. I don't know what that means. There have been foxes in Highland Park. Are they predators of deer?
Foxes they have the potential to take a fawn if that opportunity arises.
Okay.
Yes, but it's not going to have enough of an effect.
Right. I don't know what our fox density is. We didn't do that study.
Right.
What are the penalties for hunting violations?
I'm not law enforcement, but I know that they range monetarily depending on what the violation is.
Okay.
I can't answer that specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
You covered the question about our neighboring communities, so thank you. That was a question that somebody just raised. Someone has a concern about arrows from missed shots being left in the parks for the safety of children and dogs. What can you tell us about that?
It's reasonable to ask that question. Again, hunters will be hunting from tree stands, shooting down toward the ground, away from trails. So that would be unlikely to have those sort of encounters in the meadows, especially due to the remaining debris in the interior portions of that property. If an arrow were left, if a hunter couldn't retrieve the arrow, couldn't find it, the tip would be buried in the ground.
If there were hunting in Highland Park, would that help to restore the deer's natural fear of humans in any way? Or has that been your experience in other communities?
I'd say limited. Deer would get used to hunters also if they put in areas where a hunter is allowed to leave a tree stand, the deer would recognize that difference. It's like painting a black square on your living room ceiling. You'll notice it the moment you walk in. It's your home, but the deer would get used to that if a tree stand were left in the woods and eventually ignore that. It's often the hunter's scent or horizontal movement that alerts deer to the fact that there's anybody present.
One question, I think that's more for myself or the mayor, is can you confirm that the main issue that people in Highland Park have are that they're eating their garden plants? And I think when I did do that initial, Mayor, if you don't mind, when I did that initial survey, it was a combination of things. I would not put the plant in the front. I think the big one was the issue of them kind of intimidating and standing in the yard and the fear of how to handle that situation. And the non-fear of the humans was a high level concern. And I would also say Lyme's disease came up quite a bit. And of course the habitat and the plant matter, but I would kind of put it in that order if I had to. There's a question about will there be another meeting, and I think we talked about that. This is our info question and answer from these experts, but there will be further discussions about what Highland Park is going to want to do with council and opportunity to comment on that in various different ways. Apologies, someone has clarified that my mispronounced Scochet is a kosher butcher. That's the definition of that, in case someone wanted to know. So I appreciate the clarification. And I would love to know how to pronounce that at a future date. Are there ecological issues, including or in addition to erosion, threats to specific native species, forest health? Can you describe the harms we may be seeing in the Highland Park forest specifically?
I'm not a forester,
Okay.
or an herbalist. So I can't, other than it didn't look like there was any understory and there was no regeneration of any saplings. That's something else that you could do, is you could have a forest health study done. But just looking at it's not in a healthy situation. I don't know, Cindy, if you want to comment on.
There's also a lot of wisteria and other non-native plants. I didn't spend enough time there.
Yeah.
It didn't match up with the particular meeting that day. So the habitat didn't start out as healthy habitat since it had been a dump. And then when the habitat started, when plant species just sort of took advantage of the fact that the dump was able to revert to almost natural habitat, simply not being managed, the species there are not something, they would have to be removed and then native species brought in when the deer population was already lower. You need to do one before the other, lower the deer population, and if Highland Park or the Friends of the Meadows chose to remove invasive species, that could allow native species to regenerate, but only if you reduce the deer population there.
Okay. A question, and I know we're approaching 8:45, but I think it's important because I mentioned Lyme's disease was a major concern. Have deer been kind of absolved of having a significant role in the transmission of Lyme disease?
No.
Yeah, absolved. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the person's writing.
Yeah, that's okay.
They are considered a significant part of that?
Yes, because they play a significant part in the life cycle of the tick.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a short answer.
Deer serve as another food source, a blood meal, during the possible 2-year cycle of the deer tick. And so during that cycle, even though deer are not the vector species, they serve as a host for the blood meal. Or people serve as that host. That's part of the problem. And then deer are moving those ticks into your yard. Ticks falling off, and then people can be exposed to those ticks.
I'd say one more question.
How effective will a hunt in Highland Park be in neighboring communities if neighboring communities do not participate? Or as you outlined, I say, enhance or create programs.
Yeah, so as it's going to go back to the cooperative approach. So I'm pretty sure we haven't met with them since, but Middlesex County Park seemed very willing to open up Johnson Park, and Rutgers the same thing. They seemed willing to expand their program. So those I think are the two of the pieces of the puzzle that need to be on board, and they probably will be on board. Those are both big open spaces that are holding a lot of deer, and if you can, remove some of those deer out of those areas, it's definitely going to help Highland Park. In addition to opening up the meadows.
If that doesn't come through, would you say you'd still advise to move forward with the meadows piece?
Absolutely.
I would, yeah, definitely.
Mayor, I just wanted, we are pretty much at the 8:45 mark, and to be as transparent as I can, the question was asked, am I picking and choosing? I have been, because there's been a lot of comment and probably less on the questions, and as I said at the top, I wanted to focus on questions that I thought these folks could answer. There was a large number of points about those fertility methods and trying to dispute what our professionals from the state were representing. So as I think a more constructive way, I'm just offering this, Mayor, and let me know if you're comfortable, might be to get a little more information on those studies and share that with the mayor and council as well as with the public to kind of help us. Another point that has been made several times is a request to bring in another organization, which I think we have to do a little more to talk about other approaches, but I think that's something we have to investigate further. I'm not familiar with the organization and I want to understand it a little bit more, but I wanted to communicate that because that's a point that was made numerous times in the comments. And I'll certainly investigate that organization and discuss with the mayor and council if and how they'd want to pursue a conversation there. But other than that, Mayor, would you like to there is a lot of interest in, obviously there's a lot more questions and there's a lot of interesting commentary at this
So
point.
I think there were a few things that came up tonight that that we need to get more information on and share with the council prior to putting anything on a work schedule for us at a council meeting. And that includes what you were just talking about, the alternatives to the hunt, just so that we have a full range of options that we explore. I think that, you know, I don't know how quickly you can get that to us, Jody or Cindy, but I think it's important for the council and I to be able to look at all the different options that are out there. I would say that if we could get, I think our next council meeting would be in July, but before that we need to go to Public Safety Committee for a discussion about this. So I don't know how quickly we can pull all of this together, and that'll determine when we'll be able to discuss it in a council committee meeting and then the work session. So you guys can work all of that out, and I'd appreciate that. I do want to thank you both, Cindy and Jody, for all the work you've been doing with us and your work with the Department of Environmental Protection. It's very important to us here in Highland Park that we stay as healthy, that we help the earth stay as healthy as we can. And I appreciate the work and contributions you've made to that effort. So Borough Administrator, you know, if you want to close the meeting, that would be great.
Okay, I want to mention there's one other, I'm getting a little criticism for, am I editing or skipping questions? And I just want to clarify, I was focused on questions directed to these folks where there were succinct questions related to Highland Park. We will be saving the chat so that we can go back through some of the things we might have missed, and I'll certainly share that with the mayor and council. I don't know how to do that on Zoom, but I'm sure there's a way. I see there's an option. Emma, our Oz in the background, will help us do that. So I don't want people to think I was trying to suppress. I was really trying to get as many voices heard as I could in a short period of time with a lot of information to go with. But with that, I think we have a commitment to continue the conversation with the community with some more information from our friends over at Fish and Wildlife. And I would thank both of you for coming and sharing with us.
Thank you for having us, Mayor and Terry and Emma.
Okay, thank you all very much. And Emma, please save the chat. Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.